host Aaron. With me today, I got a special guest in Matt Tack. Matt, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, please?
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Aaron. They not like us. I'm excited about this conversation and talking on the podcast. A little bit about me is just my journey, I guess you can say, to be an entrepreneur. Is started at a young age. Actually, I was on a podcast yesterday just talking about how I was always like trading baseball cards and doing various things in the beginning stages of life. And I think that was like the entrepreneurial itch that I once had. That kind of then transitioned to being in high school, just doing like odds and ends stuff. But then in college, I ran a painting business. After I got out of college, though, I was always competitive because I played a lot of sports. And then after college, I didn't get into the painting world. I got into the business world and moved to Washington, D.C. And that was where I kind of figured out the back end. I worked in project management on the back end, really understood the business side. I graduated in accounting finance, which I do not regret. So, like, if anyone out there listening, if you can understand the financials, it's very, very, very important. I've obviously since learned a lot more about the financials and measuring proper KPIs uh, and entrepreneurism through owning a couple of businesses. But that just kind of like spawned. I worked for a company called Accenture for 7 years. But then in my late 20s, I just started venturing out and got into the real estate world. And then eventually I'm now in the health and wellness space, which I'm extremely passionate about. And so that kind of full circle has led to, a deep component of transitioning in a faith side, a wellness side, and then ultimately just living life full fueled, which we operate at really on six pillars. We run a podcast now based off of full fueled, but it's mind, spirit, and work, movement, fuel, and sleep are the kind of the objectives as of which we measure how we're living a full fueled life. So, in a nutshell, that's a little bit about me and kind of over the course, a short abbreviation over the course of 20 years.
Love it. How did you get to them pillars? Is that something that you've learned throughout life? Is that something that you just kind of put together recently, or how did you get to the pillars?
It came out of a scorecard. I built out a scorecard for myself, and I wanted to kind of create a measurement of like where I was at specifically at various seasons of life. This was about 5 years ago that I started kind of processing and thinking this way, and I felt like life has different, obviously, pillars, and so you want to make sure you're tracking because each one of those pillars has a feeling associated to it. So whether you realize it or not, a lot of people aren't present, with their feelings. But if you truly measure those, like almost on a daily or weekly basis, you're like, well, if I slept bad all week, how did that make me perform at work, that week? And you can kind of go back and track progress and data. But the scorecard really was just kind of a 1 through 10 exercise. Where was I in those pillars? And then being that there's six, right? So I just measured those as divisible against the number that I scored against, right? So if I was 1 out of 10, we're 60 overall. If I scored 40 out of 60 that week, I'm shooting roughly around, that 65 to 70 percentile, right? And so it was just one of those things where, well, if I'm operating within that range, how can I make the next week just a little bit better, right? Was it work? Was it sleep? Was it movement? And so those areas I can kind of pull levers on and improve in those areas. So that's really how we came up with the baseline of living full fueled is being able to measure those through really data. But it's just self reflection that really kind of cause in the causality of where I want the outcome to be.
Yeah, so it's just them little tweaks and adjustments over time to suit your life. Do you find you go out askew depending on what's going on in your life? Sort of, stuff could happen at home or it could be stressful at work. Do you find they have an impact on particular areas?
Yeah, that's such a good question because I just read a book, Play a Bigger Game by this guy, Marcus Kilius. And he was talking specifically about that, right? And we always want to have like perfect balance in our life. But the reality is you're never going to have true balance. It's just that, things get chaotic, especially when you have a wife, family, all these things happen. Maybe you have a sick parent and you got to go to that, or maybe you yourself are sick, right? And that becomes the fire hose that you need to put out at any moment of life. Um, or it's, man, there's a seasonality of work that I was really into, but then that caused in my movement and exercise, I missed out on that for maybe a period of 3 to 4 months. So I think there's levers you always pull in life, but without reflection on those and how you can improve, a year could go by and you're like, dang, man, I didn't exercise at all this year. And, or like, just when it comes to work, like, how can I program things where I can feel more fulfilled at work? All right, well, what did I do? What did I work on? What are things on the horizon? One of the things that we actually have in our team meetings, I was telling you before we got hopped on the podcast, is that in our team meetings, I like going roundtable with our employees, and we go through what we call RBTs, and those are rose, bud, and thorns. And so I just want to get an idea. It's almost a quick metric on how they're feeling, right? To get a pulse on our employees. But the R stands for rose. And so the rose is like what good is happening, whether it's personal or professional in life right now, that you're like, man, this feels really good, like a heart of gratitude moment. And then bud, what am I looking forward to that's maybe on the horizon? And again, I let them evaluate whether it's personal or professional. But then there's this other piece called the thorn, right? And what's kind of a thorn in my side that I'm like, it could be something that I'm working on, or maybe it's a roadblock that I'm like, I need to bring to somebody's attention. And so we do that as an evaluation. I love all these evaluation, but like the metric just for me personally is to like measure things on a quick scorecard. So I have a journal that I write in, and I was actually coaching my guys through this same scorecard the other day. But if you just make a quick circle, and all you do is you put your 6 pillars there, and then you measure it. Like you put little 1 to 10 around each one of them, and then you put your percentage in the middle. So, if you're going to be 45 out of 60, you're going to do 60 divided by 45 and come up with your percentage, and just put that in the middle, right? And write that down as like kind of a metric to capture for that week. I love writing stuff down because then you can kind of go back. I don't think it's something you need to digitize. We live in a digital world, everything's digitized. I love the idea of like having just a journal and being like, okay, this is how I feel, and I'm going to write it down with pen and paper. I think there's there's a more of a need for that, to actually detach from the phone, detach from the computer. So I just do it as a very simple exercise just within a journal. But I think it's extremely helpful. And with your employees, we dummy it down a little bit more. Excuse me.
Yeah, that's cool, man. But we all struggle to reflect, don't we? Really, we're terrible for it, and just kind of keep living the same way without actually looking at where we can improve, and what things have been going well, what things have been going badly for us. But I'm terrible for it, and I'm sure a lot of other people out there are. How do you encourage people to do that reflection? How do you sort of get your employees on board with that, or other people that you may talk to?
Yeah, one of the ways is we always tell them, come prepared in our meetings. Now, whether they do or not, they don't always come prepared, but we at least want them to sit down and reflect on that for a minute. So that's how we get our employees just to start thinking about that. Every Friday, we sit down and we want to have that weekly meeting where they're going through that and they're evaluating that. So that's one term of reflection. As far as some of the guys that I coach, I want them to, I tell them we want to do this daily. And so I have a faith component on my side. I'm in a mastermind of guys that we wake up and, I want a divine attention to my creator. And so one of the things that I do spiritually is I'll get up in the mornings and I'll just have that quiet time. But then I want to journal. I want to write stuff down. I heard a quote a long time ago, but the shortest pencil is longer than the longest memory. And when you can utilize a pencil to write stuff down, I really believe that there's like that double imprinting in your brain that says, hey, this is really important and I need to come back to this later. So really having like a journal and a notepad to write stuff down, but then having that set time, whether it's 20 or 30 minutes in the morning. I'm a big believer in setting a bedtime and waking up almost at the same time every day. I think that provides cadence. I'm not a big believer because I've done it for a number of years and kind of have since gotten away from that. But doing these morning routines in the morning, they take hours on end to get through. I was a cold plunger in the morning, and then I would go work out, and I would do all these things. But the reality is, I want to do the most important things first. And so I've got kind of gotten away from these really long morning routines and kind of hyper focused and brought it in. But I think one of the best ways really is to reflect, is to just wake up in the mornings, and really have that time. One of the things that I always encourage people is wake up before your kids, so that you dictate the day and they don't dictate the day on you, right? Because typically when kids wake up, they're going to wake up ornery. They don't want to get out of bed. I like getting up and I like measuring the day. I like creating that level of happiness so that I can impose that on them instead of them on me.
Yeah, that's great advice actually, because well, kids, they can be brutal in the morning, and if they come in, you're already on the back foot, aren't you?
100%. Like it's one of those things you can get ahead of the day a little bit, by them not dictating that on you. We have a 4-year-old in our house, and she just wakes up with a bad attitude every day. She cries for mom every single time. And I was like, if I beat her up and I already have set, I have slow rising cortisol levels. I'm not like, as soon as I wake up hearing somebody cry where I'm like spiking my cortisol levels. I think that's like really important because it just provides you that cadence, right? You can get more in a rhythm. It's the same thing on when, I'm a big basketball guy or, working out. It's like you want to warm up, right? You want to warm up your central nervous system before you get on the floor. You want to warm up on the treadmill, maybe before you hit a strength resistance training workout. It's the same thing with your body and your brain. You want to warm that thing up before somebody else can impose their emotional energy on you.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it can really impact you and set you up for the day. Really, if you get in a bad space in the morning, it's quite hard to get out of it, isn't it, through the day?
Yeah, it's that, and that's also goes back to kind of like a scorecard, right? Too, of measuring those things. I like the idea of just there's the 1% improvements, but what James Clear wrote in Atomic Habits, right? Every decision is an action for who you want to become. And so I love that idea. But then there's also just the reality. There's going to be days where you don't hit that 1% improvement target. It's just the reality. You might take 2 steps back. And so, a case in point, a couple days ago, we had there was a small retreat that we had, and so my wife and I went to it. But man, I was tired for like the first 2 days of like this week. I'm like foggy. A little bit lack of sleep because I went to bed a little bit later. Um, and so, if I had to be honest with myself, I'm like, man, I probably didn't optimize nearly as much as like I wanted to. The first 2 days out of that retreat, I was just a little bit foggy, and I probably took maybe 1 or 2 steps back in the work scenario because I was like, man, I really wasn't my best. I didn't have that priming of my brain that was like optimal. But I'm a big believer in this thing called like shortening the gap. So there was a podcast I listened to a while back that there was this guy Aubrey Huff, and I love the idea of like this baseball analogy of getting up and getting as many at bats as physically possible. Because in baseball, a 300 hitter is, man, that's a Hall of Fame hitter. And so Aubrey Huff was a guy that came up with the mentality of I want to hit a home run, and I believe I can hit a home run every time I get to the plate. But if I strike out, my confidence is a little bit lower probably the next time I get up to the plate. So how do I interrupt that process where I go in for, hey, I'm going to get a single this time, or maybe I'm going to carve something down the left field line or the right field line, or I'm going to take my pitch when I get it, instead of trying to hit the ball out of the stands every time. And so to build that confidence back up so that you can see that ball clearly so that you can get another home run. So that idea of like shortening the gap between strikeouts is huge. And that comes with like life as well. Life is going to come at you in all different directions. And then it's how we perceive that at bat, right? Maybe this is a season where I just get a single, right? Or a double in there where I'm not going straight for the home run because so many people, even in business, right? In a social world, we only see people that are hitting home runs. Everyone's hitting a home run to us, right? On social. And so we immediately, I need to hit home runs. I just need to go for the home run. But really just it's getting the at bat, and I need a number of at bats to compound that to ultimately see the fruits. And then I'll tell you what, enough consistency of a single here and a single there, a double and maybe a triple, the ball's going out of the park eventually.
Yeah, I love that. That's a very similar mindset to I don't know if you've seen any sort of pro cycling stuff, but back sort of probably 10, 15 years ago now, the Team Sky cycling team, they came up with the theory, or they implemented it and made it quite famous in the UK at least, of marginal gains. So that 1% gain, so that just building confidence, just getting a little bit better in each area, and that just it kind of snowballs and it gets you so far ahead of the competition over time. But it's having that patience and building that confidence and just making these minor adjustments bit at a time to get where you want to go.
Yeah, remind me who was the coach on that team? I do remember that. That was actually an analogy. I think it was a reference in Atomic Habits, maybe too. But do you remember? Do you recall the coach's name on that?
Yes, Dave Brazefield, I think was his name. He's been knighted and let me have a look. I'll double check if we know while we're here. We'll have a look. I'm pretty sure it's Dave
Yeah,
Brazefield.
yeah. That's so
Dave,
that
yeah, Dave Brailsford. That's his name.
okay.
All
And
right.
they were the worst. They were the worst cycling team perennially, like for like 30 years, if I'm correct in that. And then when he came in, yeah, the minimal margin gains, they within 3 to 5 years, you were saying, they become perennial Tour de France winners.
Yeah, they were massive once they got to a certain point, and they just continued and continued and continued. And he also ran the British cycling team as well. And in that 2012 Olympics, they had their best results ever.
That's
So
marginal gain like that. Yeah, that's 100%. How do you create? And th that's what's really cool about business too. You take this across all spectrums of life, but in working out, right? I have I love the idea of like working out because so many people once they don't see the results right away, they're like, I don't want to hit the gym. But in reality, it's that little extra effort that creates those marginal gain. And typically that's when it comes to like nutrition, right? So the marginal gain that you're going to get usually in the gym is going to come out of nutrition, but very few people want to like just make those small changes in nutrition, right? Of like going heavy on the protein instead of getting all those carbohydrates loaded in their diet, or counting their macros so they know what they're putting into their body and how they're fueling their body, can create this like massive change in my life. So I was more of a cardiovascular guy over the past couple years, and I ate really, really lean. So I didn't eat actually a ton of meat, and I was operating at a major caloric deficit, but I just didn't feel right. And so I transitioned that this year into, all right, I'm gonna focus really, really heavy on protein. And so I have a nutritional background, and I was like, I'm gonna dial it in a little bit more. And I'll tell you what, man, I by dialing in my nutrition and packing in protein, knowing how many carbohydrates and fats I was actually rolling into my body. And not only that, but timed carbohydrates and fats. Those minimal margins that I was creating created an insane pathway in terms of like, I mean, you see me in January and you see side by side photos now. I mean, it's insane. Like my muscles are bulging. It's pretty wild, but it literally is like as you stack it, I was measuring just a little bit more, those little bit marginal gains that I'm like, wow, I saw that natural like progression overall. Um, and it happens like just in a scenario of business though too. It's the same thing. One thing we decided to do in our business recently is bring the ads in-house. And so we're like, oh, well, by learning the ads, we can save on the management fee that we're paying to the media company. And we're able to really get an understanding of how we're like, how we're treating our ads. And so I actually read this book. You might be familiar with Sabri Subi, but I read this guy's book, Sell Like Crazy, and I literally tabbed pages. I was really getting an understanding of how to create copy and how to write ads and then put them on there and then create out the funnel. So over the past 2 months, we've really tried to dial that in house, but we're seeing like these small marginal benefits right now that, hey, we got a little bit better this month at our ads, like they got it, our copy was a little bit better. And so then we're doubling down and looking at the metrics and the KPIs as far as we're getting for our CPAs and our CPCs. And again, I like going back to the full spectrum because that's again a balance of work. Um, then on my side is my nutritional, the movement side, and then the fuel side is nutrition. Where am I, measuring myself on that? So all these things kind of come into play when you're measuring. Like if you're consistently measuring those things, there's a curiosity to get a little bit better and make small marginal gains.
Yeah, and I think if you're measuring stuff, it helps as well because you can kind of see that improvement, can't you, over time? Because I think that's where a lot of people sort of quit and don't stick with things, especially where the gains are marginal and this small incremental improvements. If they're not seeing it, they don't continue with it because we're in a world now of instant gratification. We want everything now, and I think that's just the mindset. When you're not seeing anything or you're not tracking to get any results or any positivity, then it makes it really difficult to stick with it.
For sure. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. This is something I went to a men's group yesterday, and there was this idea that I had recently, and I'm like, I think in my near future, I want to write a book. It's something that I definitely like writing. Um, but there's this also this I call it like intentional conflict, and you can have intentional conflict with other people, or you can have intentional conflict with yourself. Um, but again, it's like the a very for a very brief period of time, I think it's good to have like this conflict because usually on the other side of conflict is resolution. So if you can step into like an intentional conflict, we can get to the resolution. Like, what's the resolution to this? I'm very linear thinking in that approach. And so, again, going through like the scorecard, I keep going back to the scorecard, but that when you have intentional conflict with yourself, usually that's like in the gym, right? And if I'm going to the gym, I go into the gym with like an intentionality that's like violent. And I actually do believe, I'm all over people for this, is that if you choose to go to the gym, it needs to go you need to have some sort of violence in you. Like you need to violently attack the gym. Like there's a like it's a go in there with a violent attitude. Like I am going in there to demolish. And so I really do, like I have a true heart and belief like that everyone needs to go in with that level of attitude of like I'm going into like intentional like really conflict with myself because the resolution on the other side is I'm going to feel a lot better. um, but then there's this kind of like paradigm of with my wife, and sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. But of like getting into that conflict of vulnerability too, but like having intentional conflict in there so that we can communicate, but then that level of communication always has like a better resolve on the other side of it. And so I'm definitely trying to absorb and like kind of wrap my head around of you don't want to fracture relationships, but this idea of like intentional conflict, not only with yourself, not all the time either, but like stepping into these intentional conflicts. But what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, but I'd probably agree to to a degree at least. I mean, when I go to the gym, I have high intensity and low intensity days, and they're programmed in. So I'm a bit more up for it on the high intensity days because I kind of have to be to push through, and on the other days I'm a bit more low key, to be honest. And relationship wise, you absolutely need conflict. It needs to be in a safe way, of course, but we absolutely need conflict because otherwise your relationship will just stagnate. You won't be able to move forward together. And the whole point is to find that common ground that you can move forward together. And if you can't do that, then, or if you just keep things to yourself and you never communicate about stuff, then you'll never move forward ultimately.
Yeah, that's so good. There's we went to one of the things that I think every actually couple should do is we went in my wife and I went to our first 12 years of marriage. We went to our first ever marriage retreat. So we sat down with about 5 or 6 other couples. But one thing that I got out of that that was extremely beneficial for me was this idea of like radical curiosity. And I think that's what like propels me in life, even when life gets hard, is that there's still a curiosity of what's coming for tomorrow, um, but like being intentionally present today. And that was just something that I think in relationships, your ability to actually not burn out in maybe business or anything that you're approaching in life is this idea of like radical curiosity. And I think that's what conflict brings too. There's like there's this like curiosity, what's on the other side of it, and that really is what spurns my momentum, and I think for life and the fervor of life is that the idea of radical curiosity. So that was something I captured and that kind of stored myself.
Yeah, and as humans, we want, no matter what area of life it is, we always want that level of stability, but we also want that little bit of chaos just to keep us interested, don't we? And that little bit of chaos to keep us, wondering, oh, what's going to happen, what could be next.
That's the mystery, right? There's always going to be a mystery that you have to unsolve and unearth. I mean, as people, we're creators. And I love the idea of, creation. We're meant to create. Uh, we're always creating something at the end of the day. Like, and that's what I love about the idea of walking in each day with like a new story. Um, because you literally are creating a story. And it's a new chapter to your book almost every day that we're creating and we're fleshing out. And what does that look like? And how do I try to make like today an amazing story? I don't know how is it going to look like today, but what I love is like it usually happens through other people, podcasts that we're on, like this message talking about it, right? That's part of the narrative of the story of creating this message, and then that how you scripting your story because we're the narrators at the end of the day. We have the decision to narrate that, uh, and that mystery is what you're unraveling every single day. So that's cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously, you've got your own podcast. How do you find that? Does that help you with, exploring some of that mystery as well? Because, is it just yourself? Do you have guests on, or is it just you on the podcast?
No, I have a partner. So Dr. Alfred Alessi, we own a clinic here in Tampa Bay together. And we do functional wellness across the board, but our main things are chiropractic care. Then we have infrared sauna and a cold plunge tub in there as well. And then we do weight loss and nutrition. So we cover the whole gamut, but we do the full field podcast together. And what's really cool is we mainly stick on the health and wellness side of things for a majority of the time. We don't talk about our pillars, but we'll bring in the spirit component. We'll also bring in a lot of the movement side of things. We both enjoy working out, and so that's a non-negotiable that we have for ourselves. So that's how what kind of like spurred that on is that really kind of commit and create a new voice, put a couple voices out in the world as we learn and kind of adapt to new things. I always like treating myself as a guinea pig on new stuff. And so we do that all the time. We're always testing out products. We're always, just looking at, hey, did this work for you? Did this not work for you? Why not? Or why did it, if it did? And all these things that we get to kind of like toy around with is something that we're really passionate about. We have this idea, living full fueled is kind of being the forever athlete. We kind of came up with this concept probably about 6 or 7 months ago, but that really encapsulates the pillars because we want to step into life being competitive. Like I want there to be some level of competition, and I never want that removed, whether it be some of the hobbies that I have, or work, or family life. There's got to be a level of competition because as we were talking about, that's where the mystery comes in, right? Like, did I chalk up an L? Did I chalk up a W? What is that like? There's no real ties, right? So, you're going to win some, you're going to lose some, but how am I operating with a level of curiosity that allows me to be competitive? And that level of competition, I think, is what really, motivates us to do the podcast, to run our clinic, and to coach other people on these things because I think it's really, really important. One of the things though that we really, really focus on is how we're treating our shell that we've been giving. I believe we're a spiritual being with a really a borrowed shell. And so as we look at our shell, like, how are we treating that with like the utmost respect every day? And so that's what we try to like highlight and focus on is really that fuel side and that movement side of treating our temple with the utmost respect every single day.
Yeah, definitely. What does your kind of training protocol look like then? What are you currently doing?
What we do is a lot of blood work. So like blood work front side, that's, I'm a big believer that your blood speaks. Like if you get blood work done routinely, I get mine done twice a year now, but I was getting it every quarter. But blood work really tells you a lot. So one specific piece of blood work though is testosterone levels. So we're seeing, especially here in America, we're seeing like uh, testosterone levels, I mean, way down, right? Borderline where some men have higher estrogen levels than they do testosterone levels. It's wild. So we like one of the big things is promoting how are we getting higher testosterone levels, and there's a number of ways you can do that through supplementation, through working out. Um, but hormone replacement is a big thing too. So where you're seeing typically a dip in your testosterone levels is mid 30s is where we're seeing really a dip. Um, and so it's like, what can you do? If you're done having kids, I highly recommend hormone replacement. I've gotten on hormone replacement now at 39, and definitely have seen massive benefits from that. So that's like the first protocol. Second protocol is absolutely nutrition. We are creatures of habit, and so many times we go for just the next treat to satisfy our hunger. And how is that treat actual fuel? Like, is it fuel that you need at that given time? And so it's an understanding of your habit structure and your association to food. Are you just eating to eat? Or are you eating for fuel? And so it's knowing when you're going to be using carbohydrates and fats versus like when you actually need protein intake, and how those synergistically work together throughout the day to maximize a full body optimization. Because what's wild about you and me, Aaron, is like, we look different, but our internals look very similar, right? Depending on, our brain, the chemistry of it, uh, our hearts, typically they don't range like all that crazy. Really, what's the difference between a man and a woman is just a woman has testosterone, or a woman has estrogen, and I have a testosterone, right? A higher level of testosterone. So that's the difference between human beings, really, at the end of the day. That's why I divert to the spiritual, the soul side of what makes you you, and uniquely you. So then on the backside of that, though, we do believe that resistance training is a key component to living full fueled. And so getting in that, that 3 or 4 days a week of high intensity resistance training, where your muscles are really, really being pushed and fueled. So that's where the movement piece, we're moving every day, but that velocity of resistance training is built into the protocol. Um, and then I really, on the outside of that, is just working through the mindset of what that all means, right? If you aren't doing it with a larger purpose of a why, like, well, then like you don't really have a clear objective of why you're doing it in general. So really establishing and understanding your why, as an encourager to the audience, Find Your Why by Simon Sinek is a great book to kind of go and evaluate and kind of go through that to really understand, all right, why am I here on earth? I just love that question because we really need to identify, like, all right, yeah, what's our purpose? Why am I here?
Yeah, it's quite a lot to unpack there. Yeah, I find personally, my nutrition and training go hand in hand. So if one falls off, the other kind of follows a little bit. So I don't know if you've experienced that yourself, but so I recently had an operation, so I've not been in the gym for probably a month now, and that's because I've not been in the gym. Whether it's not my mood and everything else is lowered as well because of it, but then I'm eating junk and just not looking after myself either. So, but I know once I get back to being in the gym properly, and I'm ready to go, my diet will come with it, and that's always been the case for me throughout my life. Do you
Yeah,
ever
that's
experience some stuff like that, or?
Yeah, it is. And I do, um, the injuries always occur. So I actually, I put out my back probably, I don't know, 2 or 3 months ago. And I was like, oh man, like, what am I going to do? And thought I was going to actually be out for a while. But I actually hopped on it right away. So like I got on some BPC 157, which I routinely stay on. I stay on this peptide. It's the body protecting compound. So that aided me in the process, and then did some infrared sauna work and some massage therapy right away, and got through that. But I think it's a lot of times, when injury occurs or things like happen, that level of discipline with nutritious or nutrition needs to come into play. And so that's what actually I coach my guys a lot through. This is case in point. There's a guy that I'm coaching right now. He had 3 kids, just had his fourth. And so an infant child comes into his home and he's like, dude, I don't have the time of day. We're barely sleeping at night. Um, I'm getting up in the middle of the night. It's just like extremely chaotic. And so I coached him through that, and I said, look, I understand you can't get to the gym all the time, but nutrition can't fall off, because if the nutrition falls off, then we're not gonna be able to shorten that gap for when you do get back into the gym. And so one of the things that we had to step through is just really maintaining his nutrition and getting that dialed in. And so that's a kind of the one of those mindset tricks that you really have to play with yourself. But don't get me wrong, I've definitely gone through my ebbs and flows of like, am I dialed into my nutrition? Am I not? How am I working out? How am I not? But that was one example that he actually stayed dialed in on his nutrition, and so he didn't gain any weight. He yeah, I think he was, our goal was to drop, he had dropped about 25 pounds, and he has about 20 more to drop while he's building muscle. But during this time frame that he really hasn't been in the gym, it was about, I think the kid's about 2 months old now. Um, but his nutrition did stay consistent. And so that's where I do I do see that, there's going to be ebbs and flows, but if you really can dial in your nutrition and know when and how things work for you, um, it can make all the difference in how you rebound when you do get to the gym, when you're recovering, right? How you optimizing your sleep with nutrition and all those things. So I hope that makes sense how I approach that kind of like outlook now, because how I do it is, if I do have an injury, well, it's how fast I can recover utilizing nutrition as well as other modalities to get me back where I want to be.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm just terrible for it at the minute, and I think a lot of it with nutrition as well is there's a psychological and emotional element to it as well, isn't it? So if you haven't got that sorted out, then it can constantly be a bit of a pitfall, which it seems to be for me. If I'm not in the gym, my diet is terrible always.
Yeah, you know what, I'll tell you the truth too. It's tough where in my environment because my wife isn't on the same nutritional plan as I am. But one thing that actually really helps is we have an app that we go through. So we give all of our coaching guys an app where they track the macros. Um, but I think you can track it into like MyFitnessPal and other things as well. Um, but if you could learn how to, really everyone learn how to like track macros and really understand how proteins, carbohydrates, and fats actually work within the body, it is a complete game changer because uh, if you bear with me just for a minute, I'll kind of walk you through the nutrition side of things. But so proteins can't be stored, right? So proteins are utilized as amino acids, branched chain amino acids, where it actually goes and targets the muscles. And so if you're repairing, from a post workout, that's protein obviously is a source. And that's why I focus on a protein heavy diet. So I do eat a lot of red meats, but I try to get to lean meats like chicken. But what's cool about proteins is that they're not going to store, right? So what you don't use, you defecate, you just poop it out. Um, Whereas carbohydrates and fats are completely different. Carbohydrates are 4 calories per gram. Fats are 9 calories per gram. And so when you eat those, they store and they can compound storing, right? So if you overeat carbohydrates and fats, they will just naturally keep attaching, keep attaching, keep attaching. And that's when you get excess visceral fat. But if you focus on the protein side of things, and that's why I use this hydrolyzed protein. I recommend it to everyone. It's by Dymatize, but it's the ISO 100. It's really low impact on the gut, but I'm able to get 50 to 75 grams of protein because I put a couple scoops in there. But it's not like a super thick shake, but it keeps me satiated as well. And I know I'm getting the proper protein intake. So I usually get about 225 grams of protein in a day. Um, Whereas like my carbohydrates and fats, because I'm measuring those, I usually range from anywhere from 3 to 350 carbohydrates and about 100 grams of fat. Uh, and my fats will typically come from like an almond butter that I put over like a protein waffle, or it'll come from maybe a red meat that I have that split 80/20, 90/10. So I'll get some fats in there as well. Um, but then another thing to realize is that when you're going into cardio, that's when you want carbohydrates and fat. So if you're going for a long run, or if it's the night before and you're going a long run that morning or maybe that day, that's when you need carbohydrates because you know you're going into maybe some level 2 training and you're going to be burning at a higher level. But if you're doing resistance training, you want to be protein heavy. So it's knowing when you're doing things to time those appropriately of when you're going to be utilizing them. And so that's why it's good to like really program in your cardiovascular training of when you're going to be doing that and then when you're going to be doing your resistance training because those things ebb and flow and then having an understanding of how you're counting your macros is imperative to how you're going to perform.
Absolutely. When I'm training, I do track my macros. Well, I say track my macros. To be honest, I track my protein and my overall calories, and I find that works for me, and that's easy for me to do rather than worrying about how I'm spreading the rest of the calories out. I just make sure I hit my protein target and I spread the rest of the calories out however I see fit because it just gives me that bit of flexibility on the day. If I'm going out and I want to eat a dessert or something, then I can make it fit then.
Yeah, I always say live by the 80/20 rule too. So, and I think that when you're tracking protein, if you're hitting your protein target, you almost guaranteed are not going over your carbs and fats because you're focusing on protein, right? So if that's where your focus is, usually you're not gonna exceed those other areas. But then also, like how I believe in desserts and just like living the quality of life. is by the 80-20 rule. I don't know if you ever read that book by Richard Koch, but it's a great book. And he talks about the 80-20 principles. And I think that really comes down to like the quality, like nutrition too. So like if 80% of the time you're pretty dialed in, you are dialed in, you're operating within a strong protein heavy diet and you're not at a protein deficiency, to have that dessert, you know, in that 20 percentile, one day a week, you have a dessert, and you're like, man, I'm gonna eat dessert tonight. That is a good thing, right? You're still like you enjoy life. And so life isn't meant to be extremely painful all the time, but you just need to be dialed in 80% of the time because you're going to reap the majority of benefits. 20%, live it. Like do your thing. I think that's the cool thing about delayed gratification is earn it, right? Earn it first, then reward yourself.
Yeah, I like that. Ultimately, if you don't give yourself them little rewards or allow yourself to live a little bit, then you're not going to stick it anyway. But the majority of people aren't because it's just going to be miserable, isn't it?
Yeah, it's you want to enjoy life and also like I would I would go as far as saying you're probably going to be a pretty crappy person to be around if you aren't enjoying life a little bit. And so like if you're not enjoying life, I feel like you're probably just going to be like judgmental about everything. And so you have to enjoy life. Like there's got to be that time where you're like going to eat a dessert or maybe have a glass of wine. I don't drink hardly at all anymore, but the reality is like when I'm around my wife and we want to have a nice glass of wine, like I'm gonna have a glass of wine, right? Uh, but that's a few and far between. I do reward myself, so I know I put in the work, right, to earn that glass of wine. So I do believe that there's a reward cycle to that. But yeah, you're completely right. You do have to enjoy life. Like we're meant to enjoy it.
Absolutely, absolutely. How do you use that 80-20 rule with your business as well, with work, or is it just kind of nutrition that you're using it for?
No, I mean across the board, I try to evaluate because I believe if I'm always work, 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 right? It then is going to affect my family front. Like, am I going to be truly present with my family? I have three girls, so they're 8, 6, and 4. So I got a lot of estrogen in the house, and then I got my wife. And one of the things that I have to like envision, and I learned this from other people, but usually what I've seen is like guys that focus only on work all the time is that then they're devoid in their home front. And so they really don't have a relationship with their wife. They probably have a pretty stale relationship with their kids. And then they also put too much pressure on their kids. Like, let your kid be like live their life. You don't have to try to live through them, right? Um, in the States here, it is like a major issue where parents try to live through their kids, like try to live through them playing baseball or basketball or whatever it is. Oh, this kid's going, uh, like they're so proud of them. That's good to be proud of them, but then you're really trying to live a second life through them. That's like been a major problem. But like when you are so focused on work like all the time, there's no way to physically be present with your family. And I've been in a season of that when I was in real estate. I mean, all I could think about was the next deal. Like it was the next deal. I couldn't even be happy in the current deal we were in. It was always like the next deal. And so that was like a really big issue for me is because I like was never intentional and present with my family. And so like I always had this angst about me and lived with a sense of anxiety that I had to be comfortable with, but you really don't. Because at the end of the day, now I've evaluated, no, my wife wants me home at 6 o'clock for dinner every night. I'm gonna do that, right? That's part of the process. Like that was like a non-negotiable. I'm gonna be home. One of the things that I do is I put my girls down every night and I get to have a conversation with them. So my 8-year-old girl, I was like laying down in bed with her last night and I was just asking her like real life questions, like, how did your day go? What did you like most about today? Uh, who are your friends? Like, what are their names, right? What do you? I even got like asked her because she golfs. I was like, do you really like golf? Like those questions typically we just bypass because they're kids. But I want to get to know her a little bit more. Like, what's her passions, her dreams, those things. And so I just laid in bed with 20 minutes with her and just got to know her. And that's part of the presence that I live by, that 80/20 principle, is that there's still going to be work tomorrow regardless. Like, there's the work never ends. Uh, my daughter is not going to be 8 years old again. Like, the reality is she's going to turn 9, she's going to turn 10, she's going to turn 11. I'm going to lose those years when she's 13, 14, and 15, and then hanging out with friends. She doesn't really want to be about, probably a dad all that much more. And so that 80/20 for me is really, really big in this season, because I want to know my children. I want to know my wife, right? And all the dreams and ambitions that I have when we're 20 years of marriage, like, I want to make sure that I'm investing in that foundation now, because, like, I don't want to get 10 years down the road and be like, do I actually know you and like you? Um, and like, so many of us lose out on that, especially entrepreneurs, that we lose out on that focus because we're like just so focused on the grind and we don't even know the family that we're coming home to. So I very much live by that principle. I communicate with them, and I don't give them 20%. I want to give them my best. Um, so I give them, I probably give them more than that 20%, but it is very much where work's going to come tomorrow.
That's fantastic. I got a daughter myself, so I know exactly what it's like. You need to invest that time with them. You know, you will not get that time back, and ultimately, I think the work will still be there when they have moved out and they're gone and they live in their own life. But you look back and you'll really miss having the opportunity to have spent that time with them, to get to know them, and to build that relationship, and not taking it.
Yeah, for sure. How old are your kids?
So my daughter is 7 now as well, so she's nearly 8.
Nice.
So
I have an 8 and a 7 year old, so
yeah,
I'm right in between that. Eight. Actually, she turns 7 on the 18th in 5 days. So 8,
cool.
7, and 4.
Yeah, it's a good age actually. It's a good age.
Yeah, man. And honestly, I tremendous respect uh, for the guys that raise daughters. What I'm worried about is, we need strong men to raise strong women, but we also need strong men out there to raise other strong men, because I feel like we're getting weak as a society and raising some of these kids up, these boys. I pray over them every night that God would start preparing their friends and their future mate, because that is a big thing that I think we need in this world, is we need more strong men.
Yeah, I'm getting worried about the teenage years when they come. I'm not looking forward to that.
Yeah, you know what? This is how I approach that too. I hear a lot of guys, older men, that say, "Hey, well, you gotta watch out for those teenage years." And one thing that I started doing, I think I started doing it about 3 years ago, is I wanted to start preparing their mindset. As children, the responsibility of a dad is that I get to shape their soul. And so what I started doing about 3 years ago is I go into their room, and as like they're going down to sleep, I look at them dead in the eyes. Sometimes I go forehead to forehead. We touch foreheads, and I'll go up. My middle daughter, she's very much of a firecracker, but I'll go forehead to forehead with her, and I'll say, "Hey, Melina, can I tell you about you?" And I might get emotional here because it gets me every time, but I go forehead to forehead, and I was like, "Hey, can I get permission to tell you about you?" And one reason why I do that is because I want to empower them to be incredibly strong, right? I want them to see how amazing they are. And so one thing I tell them almost off the bat is that, Melina, you're a leader, right? You're a leader. You're an amazing leader. And then the other things that I go through is just other things that I love about them. I love your smile. You got one of the best smiles. Uh, Daddy is so honored that I get to be your daddy. I just love your energy that you bring to the family. And then I go through just a bunch of other things that I love about them. But one thing that I'm hoping, right? They're still 8, 7, and 4. That I'm hoping, as guys tell me that, oh, you got to watch out for their teenage years. I hope I'm raising strong enough women that utilize discernment in their approach of how they choose their friends, because their friends are really going to dictate kind of the environment that they really like bring home at the end of the day. But I want to make sure that I protect my home so powerfully enough that then they go out into the world and they're able to be leaders and shape that world with how they're taught at home. And so I that's how I'm approaching those teenage years, even though I haven't got there yet. I'm approaching those teenage years is that I want to set the foundation so strong that they're going to be world changers.
I love that. It's it's funny you say about friends and stuff though, because environment shapes us so much. Not just kids, everybody. The environment that we put ourselves in, and the people we surround ourselves with, really drives and influences who we are. How do you manage that kind of environment? How do you create a positive environment, not just as at home, but sort of in work and other areas of your life?
Yeah, that's good. And I'll be honest with you. I went through a struggle. I hired on a consultant not too long ago. I made a few actually, I would say like rather poor decisions in terms of like consultants that I hired on, and there was a decent amount of friction. Um, and I had to evaluate whether they like were a good fit or not a good fit. Um, but then also keeping optimism ahead. And so that's there is a fine line there. But I'm also seeing that I am a dictator of that. So like I get to choose. Like we have the power of choice. And so it's that constant evaluation, always having like the idea of a scorecard in the back of your mind of like above the line or below the line thinking. And it does that, not being judgmental towards anyone, but does that person belong in my circle? And the older and older I get, that you want to really protect that at all cost, because I think it really comes down to as far as what you're trying to like where you're trying to get the outcome to be. Like where do you want the outcome to go? Like what's the best possible outcome of like literally life? Like that's why I think it's good to have like goals and strategies towards that. Not that you need to be married to those goals. I think there's needs to be a detachment, but like then there's a constant evaluation of who needs to be in your life. And so there's so many people that have kind of like shed off from my day to day and week to week and year to year that really just don't fit the environment of like where I want the outcome to be and where I'm heading. And so that really there you we need to evaluate that, right? Because that ultimately is going to be a level of optimism that you're going to have for life. Like, am I waking up every day with like a sense of vigor? And it like, does this person kind of fit that standard? Not that they might be a bad person, but they might not be going where you want to go, and that's okay. And so maybe it's not necessarily disenfranchising, but maybe it's a longer period of separation, that because that's not where you intend the outcome to be. And so it's that sense of evaluation and that scorecard, whether it's at work, right? It, you I go with my partner. We went through this. Like the reason why we just don't hire willy nilly is because the people that we hire into our organization, like we want to be great, right? No one says you want to be, I want to be average. I'd be okay with being average, right? No, I want to be great, right? Well, you're only as great as the people that you bring in your organization. And so if we hire subpar, you think we're going to be great by hiring subpar? No, that's not going to like. So that's the evaluation that like I've even had to go through. I'm like, man, I made some bad hires on consultants and various things. And so then how do we evaluate that in terms of our literally our day to day, our friendships, our work scenarios of who we're hiring to come on our teams. Um, it honestly, you even have to evaluate it in your marriage, right? Like, where is this going, right? We're completely different people, maybe 10 to 15 years later. Like, where's this going? Are you a good fit for me? Am I a good fit for you? I don't know. Let's try to figure this out. And so it's evaluating that. You can't get rid of your kid. That would be tough. But it's not shutting off the children, but like really have an evaluation of like just talking about it routinely. And my wife and I, one of the biggest positives in my life has been my wife. She's just been my support system. We constantly communicate, but that was through some baggage that I had in my 20s. I was a She should have got rid of me a long time ago. And but the net she believed in me, and she believed in everything that I was doing, and we work through that. So there's an element of working through some stuff too. So I don't want to completely dismiss that, because my wife probably should have got rid of me when I was 26, because I was an attitude. Man, I was like that. Your test is your testimony. That was her test. I was an idiot. And now on the other side of that, I've grown so much. She stayed committed. We worked through that. We have an amazing marriage. But those are so some of the things that you need to evaluate as you grow, learn, and where you intend the outcome to be.
Yeah, that's good. The obviously you said about hiring people and consultants and stuff like that as well. What about clients? Do you also choose clients based on if they're a good fit?
Yeah, hands down. Now we are in something that we're in a trade that it's hard to fire clients per se, but we do have an idea, right? When you go after your avatar, it's it's tough when you have a brick and mortar. Now our coaching program, I know when somebody's going to be a good fit or not, right? I treat that more like our mastermind. So I know when somebody's going to be a good fit coming in. If they're not, then I'll just tell them flat out, like, hey, like it's probably not for you, it's probably not a good fit. But for our brick and mortar, now that's something a little bit different, because people are coming in for care, right? And we want to treat everyone with the utmost respect. But there have been times, right? So like we set a very high moral integrity in our clinic, and so there are really creepy people that can overstep those boundaries. It's weird. So we have women that are receptionists at our clinic, and there's we got a borderline some guys that come in there, and they're a little odd, right? So we have to border that. So we have to had fire some clients in that scenario where like, hey man, appreciate you, but don't come back. Like we have to protect the integrity of the moral standards, and it's becoming a little fuzzy here where you're getting a little weird with our front desk. So there's been situations like that that have been it's we just, again, it's protecting the moral standard at which we operate. We want to protect our employees and make it feel safe when they come in. And then for our coaching program, you were always attracting what we put out. So usually guys like that are attracted to come into our mastermind program. That is that's going to be a good fit. But then if there's guys that just don't want to play by the rules, and they don't want to elevate other people. I haven't had that scenario, but I would, I'd be like, hey, this probably isn't a good fit.
Yeah, the mastermind program, is that an online coaching program? Is that in person as well?
No, it's an online. We do everything online. So we got guys in Detroit, Kansas City. We should get some international guys in there too. Uh, Detroit, Kansas City. We have a few guys in Tampa, Orlando, and then we got some guys in Nashville as well, and Texas. So we have, yeah, all over the place. We meet, and then we have a Discord through an app that we had built out, and so we chat amongst in there, and then we get on a phone call every other week.
Cool. How do you, what is it that you're actually delivering in that coaching? Is it just all training and nutrition, or is it mindset as well? Is it a bit of everything?
So we do three things: mindset, nutrition, and muscle. So those are the three things that we want to evaluate consistently on a weekly basis. Uh, there will be scenarios where we talk a little bit about like the business side of things, growth, scaling, those incorporating in. If there's areas of targeted interest, Then, I had guys share their stories, what they do. They brought kind of their narrative to the group as well. So that's been good. A lot of entrepreneurs in the group, a couple of them that aren't entrepreneurs, but majority of them are entrepreneurs. So bringing their story, sharing their thoughts, and then staying targeted and disciplined with nutrition and building that muscle for longevity. And then any new science that might have evolve over time, right? Because there's always new things happening in the world of uh, how longevity works and how the body works, and just being abreast of like what's new on the horizon that we might need to know about.
Yeah, longevity especially is becoming a much more popular area that people are really interested in, and there seems to be constant strides in that area as well.
Yeah, it really is, man. Between here, I mean, internationally, I think it's a massive topic, especially in the United States. But I'll tell you the truth. This is how I feel about it. A lot of people want to talk about it. Very few people want to live by it. So that's something I love. People are very curious about it. Very few people want to implement. And there's a lot of stuff out there right now that is massive, but really at the end of the day, one of the best ways for longevity is to exercise, right? Is to just put the work in the gym and to really get your cardiovascular shape up, really build muscle, dial in the nutrition. Like that's the best thing that you can do for longevity. But very few people want to implement it. They want to, hey, what do you have for me to like lose weight, right? Can I get on some metformin or semaglutide or whatever it might be? Whereas like I look at it like this, what can I utilize so that I can experience life more abundantly? And so, like, I want to train really hard. So I go in, and there's a lot of people that think, and if you follow me like on Instagram or Facebook or anything like that, they're like, this guy probably works out all the time. And I don't. I work out 45 minutes a day, right? But that hyper focus 45 minutes a day, I'll tell you what, that's violent. It's intentional. Like I go in there with a purpose, and then I incorporate nutrition, and then of course I have smaller micro workouts that I do throughout the day. So like I'll do a little bit of core workout before I get in the shower and do various things. I call those my habit stacks. But it goes back to the point. Very few people they want the easy fix still, and that happens for sure in America. They just want the real easy fix. How is it? In fact, we're running an ad right now for our chiropractic program because we have weight loss, right? And we have a nutritionist on staff, and literally this is the ad. I forget exactly our hook or the top line hook, but it's like we crack the code to weight loss without exercise. And that is what people are looking for. How can I lose weight without exercise, right? And we did crack the code. Like we have a way to do that. But the reality is if you actually can lose weight and exercise, like how amazing is that, right? For longevity purposes. And so that's just the thing. We have to run an ad like that because people want it the easy way.
It's very similar in the UK. Very, very similar. Everybody just wants the magic pill that's going to fix everything. And
Yeah,
I know you can get the injections to help you lose weight or whatever else, and there's stuff you can take, but for quality of life, so not just longevity. So you get your longevity, you lose weight or whatever, but for quality of life, you want to be able to be physically active as you get older as well. So if you're not doing any resistance training, I think you're just going to deteriorate into your old age anyway.
for sure. Resistance training is the to have a pop in your step, a real pop. Resistance training is hands down the best metric because you can see a lot of people that run all the time, and they're older, right? But they're like emaciated, they're really thin, right? Those really old runners. And I'm not saying running is a bad thing because you stay active, but typically runners, when you get older, what you'll see is that their spine will start curving in. They'll have a little bit of hunch in their back if they're not resistance training. because they're not be able to hold themselves upright anymore, and it's because of lack of a muscular structure and bone density. And so what resistance training does is it gives you that bone density to hold on to more mass while you're running. So I actually do both. I love this hybrid athlete approach that so many people are going to nowadays. It's becoming like a little bit trendy, but that's what I consider myself. I'm operating at about 207, 208 pounds. But I could run a marathon tomorrow if I wanted to. I ran a half marathon, and I'm coming up in November. I'm going to run another half marathon. I don't really love, putting that type of impact of 26 miles on my body. So a half marathon seems just about right. So I'm going to be running that in November. But it's this one thing of like, I do a heck of a lot of resistance training, and my nutrition is going to be through the roof though. When right before this, I'm going to have to eat so much because I'm going to be burning so much. But it's this idea of building that muscle supply to have that pop in your step when you're going into then your 50s, your 60s, your 70s, if you can maintain that muscle mass. But one of the most crucial things to do that though is you really need hormone replacement. So when you're tapping into your like 40s and 50s, you're likely probably done having kids. So that's when it's even more important to understand where your testosterone levels are at, because the reality is you probably need I say artificially, it's not artificially. Everything's bioidentical when you're doing testosterone replacement. But I highly recommend that people start looking that way, because that's where you can create more bone density, you can create more muscle mass, the more testosterone you have. So that's when I hands down, and I'm not a doctor, but we have a PA on staff, and she writes all of our scripts for our testosterone replacement. And I absolutely believe in that. The other thing that I believe in is BPC 157, which the FDA has really come down on really hard over the past 6 months here in the States. But the reason why they did is because it works so well. And one of the reasons it's so BPC stands for, I think I had aforementioned it, but it's the body protectant compound, um, is what the acronym for BPC stands for. But it's just a healing accelerator. That's all it is. And it's a peptide. So it's similar to the peptides that are already formed in our body, but it accelerates the healing process. So any type of inflammation that we have, it heals it probably at a 60 or 70% faster rate than just being in a static state. Because typically when people are injured, they don't move. But really what you want to do is you want to keep moving, maybe not at the rate you were, but like you want to keep moving to so that your body recognizes and is able to heal efficiently. What BPC then does, it targets that area of inflammation and allows it to rapidly move. There was a guy at our clinic last week. He had put out his back, and he was set to run um, 100 mile team ultra marathon. And so I was like, hey, we have BBC at the clinic. And so I was like, just take some of this. And I highly recommend that you do two a day before you run. And he ran his fastest time. A week prior, he had put out his back, and within a 2 week time frame, um, he was running part of the ultra at a sub six. He was running at a 5 minute 50 second pace, 5 minute 55 second pace, which is insane. So like that's the beauty of like what like a BPC would do. And it's unfortunate that the FDA has come down on it so hard, but those type of things for longevity purposes are massive.
Yeah, I've never heard of that before. Actually, I don't know if they even have it in the UK, but um, it's quite an interesting sounding thing.
Yeah, it really is. No, peptides are great. You can get them orally. I actually take mine subcutaneous, so it's actually through an injection. Same thing with testosterone. I take mine subcutaneous, even though you could take that orally or through pellets. There's actually a small and procedure that you can have done by getting testosterone replacement through pellets. But I'm the biggest believer in direct injection in a subcutaneous format. So that's the way I do it. I do it every other day, and I'll tell you what, it's an absolute game changer from a healing process. Just the way the body moves, the way the brain operates, it's huge.
Yeah, I mean, you can get TRT in the UK, and that's subcutaneous usually, or they have like a gel or a cream that you
Yep.
rub on. I don't know how effective that is, but
Yeah, no, that actually is I wouldn't call it uh I would probably call it just as effective as subcutaneous. So when you rub it on the scrotum, but it's easily transferable at that point. So like you would definitely need to make sure you're taking a shower, because when you do the cream, that's when things can transfer to a partner. So I like that's why I do the direct injection. I don't want that level of transfer, because when you're like giving her higher testosterone levels, that doesn't work out in her favor.
yeah, but they might get the benefits in the gym, right?
Yeah, they might get the benefits of Joe, that's for sure.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, how can people find you then, Matt? Where's the best place for people to go to find out a bit more about yourself and what you do?
Yeah, we're so we run the Full Field podcast. That's one of the major areas that we're trying to push forward to. So if you can find us on YouTube and any other syndication source, so please subscribe, share. We'll definitely take this one and put it on the Full Field podcast as well. The other place is I'm usually on Instagram, and I do a lot of posting on Facebook. I'm just at Matthew Tack on Facebook, and then human.optimizer on both TikTok and Instagram. So my partner is at Full Field Doc. If you want to check him out on Instagram, he puts a lot of really good content out there as well.
Cool. I'll make sure I'll pop some of the links in the show notes so people can find you a bit easier as well, and make sure they check you out. I'm definitely going to check out the podcast myself as well. Um, how often do you release your podcast? Is that like a weekly thing, or is it not necessarily set?
Nope. We release episodes every Tuesday. So we'll have an episode, usually sometimes with a guest, but maybe it's just Dr. Alessi and I just talking about current event topic that we feel like needs to get out to the world. So we drop those weekly every Tuesday.
Cool. We'll definitely check that out. Um, one question before you go:
Yeah.
Do you think your younger self would be proud of who you are today?
Do I think my younger self? That's a great question. I don't know if I've ever been asked that before. Uh, I would, I truly would. I think that there's I live life with a sense of curiosity every single day. I go in with curiosity. I have a heart for people. I definitely don't have just this inward ambition, like all the time. Like I truly love people and love serving people, and so that gives me a lot of gratitude every day. So I would say that if my younger self is like, thank you for. If I had to thank my younger self, I'd be like, thank you for searching. When I was 26 and 27, thank you for like being curious to learn more and grow more, because I can tell you, if I held on to that mental state that I had when I was 26 and 27, um, I could not say that today. I absolutely could not say that. I was pretty miserable. But today, due to God's grace, man, I've been redeemed. So I would say, yeah, he'd be pretty proud.
Good, I like that. And what does the future hold for Matt Tack?
Yeah, the future holds right now. So I've committed to doing some retreats as like a kind of a pro bono for some guys. I want to add value to some guys this year. So I'm actually doing some retreats at my house that are going to be focused on this perspective of abiding. So like hearing from our Creator, hearing from God, and then also business and protecting the temple that God's given us. So I'm going to be hosting. We're keeping it like 12 guys, so I'm inviting them to my house. So I don't know how that's going to go. So that's going to be in the near future. I think we're going to be having our first retreat in December and see how that looks and what comes about of that. But we're doing that as a give. I believe that there needs to be an element of a give. And then for our family, we're trying to be a bilingual family. I've been working on Spanish for the past few years, and my daughter is fluent. She goes to a Spanish immersion school, and so does my 7-year-old. And so I'm working towards that. So hopefully in a few years I can be fluent in Spanish and have a really good Spanish conversation, poco a poco. But and then for work, we are planning on growing our practice. So we're acquiring other local clinics in the Tampa Bay area. We would like to have in the very near future, we'd like to have 3 underneath our belt in the next 12 months. So it's an acquisition strategy that we have right now. So that's more work related and focused on that. So that's pretty much what's in the near future for us. I can't. I make my plans, but hold them lightly. I don't know what God has in store, but that's what it looks like in my mind and in my journal.
Sounds really busy. Sounds like you got a lot going on.
For sure.
Right. Is there anything you want to leave us with, Matt? Any final thoughts?
I always say, your life is your story, and you be the narrator of it. And think about the decisions. I think we talked about it earlier in the podcast. Is you're the director of that story and narrate it every day, and know your decisions because every decision is action for who you want to become.
Love that. Really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us and coming on the show.
Thank you so much, Aaron. I appreciate it. They not like us. I appreciate the time.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. And I'll chat to you soon.
See you, brother.
Take care.